Baruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together in Daf Lametes Amud Aleph, the very last line on the bottom. Anshe Tiveria had at their disposal Chame Tiveria, natural hot springs. However, those waters were putrid. They weren't usable for bathing and certainly not for drinking. So they took a silon, a pipe of cold, clean water running through the hot springs in order to warm them up and then come out on the other side in a pool. The Mishnah brings the Anshe Tiveria as a proof to the words of the Chachamim. And the question is, what is their proof? One explanation is that they're proving the previous statement of the Mishnah, that a person cannot take sand and matmin and insulate an egg and roast that egg on Shabbos. Just as you see from the Anshe Tiveria, you couldn't put a silon, a pipe, before Shabbos even, and put it through this Chame Tiveria to then insulate the cold water and heat up the cold water that would then be produced for Shabbos. However, there's a machloikis. Others learn, we saw that the Anshe Tiveria is a raya for the Chacham on the not previous statement, but the statement before that, the Reisha, which is discussing if a person wants to break an egg onto a cloth. So it says over there that according to the Chachamim, since that's considered to be toldos chama, this is a not the chama itself, but this is a derivation, a tolda of the chama. They held that this is also to cook, because a person might then be led to then cooking on toldos ha'ur, which is an iser di'araisa. However, Rabbi Yossi argues on that, and he says toldos ur, of course, is aser midi'araisa, but toldos chama, we don't make a gezeira otu toldos ha'ur. So there's two different opinions of what this Maisa Anshe Tiveria were coming to do. Says our Gemara Rav Chisda, Mi Maise she'osu Anshe Tiveria. From this Maisa that the Mishnah brought of the people of Tiveria, ve'asrei lehu Rabbanon, and Rabbanon forbade it. Batla hatmana bedavar hamoisif hevel, ve'afilu mi ba'od yom. Then hatmana in a davar that's adding hevel, adding heat, that is also to be done afilu mi ba'od yom, even on Erev Shabbos. All of the Rishonim ask, what about the fact that the Mishnah in the beginning, the fourth parak, tells us that it's an isser to the matmin on davar shehoisit moisif hevel. So all of the Rishonim explain that that's referring to ben hashmashos, whereas our Gemara that Rav Chisda is telling us is that the chiddush of the Anshe Tiveria is coming to teach us that even mi ba'od yom, even on Erev Shabbos, a person cannot insulate something that's moisif hevel. Says the Gemara, Amar Ula halacha ki Anshe Tiveria. Ula says the halacha is like the Anshe Tiveria. So now it seems that Ula is understanding different than Rav Chisda. In other words, Rav Chisda was understanding, according to the interpretation, that the Mishnah was bringing the Anshe Tiveria as a raya that you cannot be matmin adavar shemoisif hevel even mibod yoim. However, Ula understands that this was going back on the previous statement, meaning the ratio of the Mishnah, that is referring to you cannot be cooking on something that's a toldas chama, and the Mishnah was bringing the Anshe Tiveria as a proof that just like you cannot cook an egg onto a cloth that was heated in the sun, so too you cannot cook water from the Chame Tiveria, which is heated by the sun as well. However, on that Rabbi Yossi would argue, and therefore Ula says the halacha is that indeed, like the Anshe Tiveria, that you could do something like that because we do not goizer the toldas chama otu toldas ur. Omar Rav Nachman says kvar tavrisu Anshe Tiveria lesilunaihu. Rav Nachman said, but the Anshe Tiveria themselves broke their pipeline. In other words, they accepted the words of the Chachamim that this is prohibited to be done. Al kol panim, when it comes to hatmana, as was explained before, and we learned in the beginning of the third parak, or rather the end of the second parak, Lamed Daled Lamed Beis, and also we'll be learning Be'ez Hashem in the beginning of the fourth parak. Hatmana has two different aspects. There's an Isser Hatmana before Shabbos, and that's what we're discussing. Adavar Shemoisif Hevel, and therefore something cannot be insulated that's going to then increase the intensity of the heat, even if it's done before Shabbos. A gezer that person might then also matmin and insulate on something that is ashes that have burning coals, embers, whereby he'll be then over the Isser of Shema Yechata. Maybe he'll then come and stoke the coals. And then there's another Hatmana that is Davar She'eino Moisif Hevel, and that can't be done on Shabbos. Al Kapanim, our Gemara now goes on to explain that which the Mishnah discusses of the Anshe Tiveria. The din was that if it was done on Shabbos, that those waters are aser berechitza and aser b'shtia. If it was for Yom Tif, it would be aser berechitza and muter b'shtia. Explains the Gemara to clarify, my rechitza, what is this rechitza, the bathing that we're referring to that is aser? Ilema rechitzas kol gufoi, if you want to say we're referring to the bathing of the entire body. Elachamin shehuchmu b'Shabbos hu da'asurin. That which it says in the Mishnah is chamin that's hutru b'Shabbos is aser, thereby to bathe the whole guf. Diuk. Ha chamin shehuchmu me'erev Shabbos mutarin. But if it was chamin that was heated up before Shabbos, then it would be mutter to then bathe one's entire body. V'hatani, yet the Brisa says otherwise. Chamin shehuchmu me'erev Shabbos l'mocha roichetz bohen panav yodav v'raglav aval loy kol gufoy. Here it says if it was heated up before Shabbos, then that water can be used only to wash one's hands, feet, and face, but not one's entire body. Elo panav yodav v'raglav. You must say rather we're talking about the Isser Rechitza that's referred to in our Mishnah is also to then wash one's hand, feet, and face if it was heated up on Shabbos. If it was heated up on Erev Shabbos, then it would be mutter. Ask the Gemara, Ema Seifa, but what about the Seifa of our Mishnah? B'yomtiv kechamin shehuchma b'yomtiv v'asur b'rechitza umutarim b'shetiyah. When it comes to Yontif, it says if it was heated up on Yontif, then it's asur b'rechitza and it's mutarin b'shetiyah. Says the Gemara, if so, how are you going to fit it so that it's going to be aser b'rechitza? Leimatnan stam Beis. You'd have to say that the stam Mishnah in front of us, our Mishnah, is authored by Beis Shammai. Disnan Beis Shammai oimrim lo yochem adam chamin l'raglav elim kein ru'uin l'shtiyah. A person cannot heat up on Yontif hot water for his feet unless it's going to be heated up for drinking. If there is for the drinking, and then afterwards he wants to use it for his legs or his feet or his fans or his hands or his face, he can do so. But he can't heat it up specifically to then bathe himself for his hands, feet, or face. Ubeis Hillel Matir, and Beis Hillel argues. So that would be difficult to then establish the Stam Mishnah is going like Beis Shammai, not like Beis Hillel, which we know the halacha is always like Beis Hillel. Rav Iko bar Chananya lihishtatef bohen kol gufo yaskin. No, we're talking about the Isser Rechitza over here is referring to lihishtatef, referring to then taking, let's say, a bucket of the hot water and then pouring it over one's body. That's what we're saying over here would be aser on Shabbos, but if it was heated up before Shabbos, then it would be mutter kol gufoy. V'haitanahu, and our Mishnah is like the following Tana referring to Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, the Tanya. It says in the following brisa, lo yishtatef adam kol gufoy, a person cannot wash, he cannot rinse his entire body, bein bechamin, bein betzonim, div Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is most machmir, and he says one cannot even rinse his entire body, not only with hot water that was heated up before Shabbos, but even with cold water. Rabbi Shimon Mati. Rabbi Shimon, that's our Mishnah, is saying it's mutter. If it was heated up before Shabbos, one can, yes, rinse his entire body. Rabbi Yehuda oimer bechamin oser betzonin mutter. Rabbi Yehuda is a in-between opinion. He says when it comes to chamin that was heated up before Shabbos, he cannot rinse his entire body. However, it's with cold water he could. Rav Chisda. So therefore it comes out that our Mishnah is indeed, says the Gemara Rabbi Shimon, that one can heat up water before Shabbos and then he can rinse his entire body on Shabbos. Of course, if he did on Shabbos, it would be Aser though. Rav Chisda machloikes bekli. Aval bekarka divrei hakol muter. Rav Chisda wants to explain this machloikes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, that when they argue about chamin that was huchmu before Shabbos, whereas we said Rabbi Shimon is matir, Rabbi Yehuda is aser, that machloikes is only, he says, bekli, because in a kli, then there's a concern that a person might see that there's hot water on a kli, and therefore it was heated up with a heat source of fire, which is an Isser Deraisa. He'll think you can go ahead and then heat up. You can go ahead and take cold water and put it into a hot water, whereby that would be a problem of cooking. So therefore Rabbi Yehuda says that's also, Rabbi Shimon is not concerned about that. And therefore he says a mutter. But when it comes to karka, where there's no such concern, because the hot water in the ground, when you have, let's say, a bath on the ground, it wasn't heated up by the fire, but usually it's heated up by chamei Tiveria, by hot springs. Ask the Gemara, va'asu lehu rabbanon. But we saw that the Anshe Tiveria was talking about in the karka, even though it was heated up by a hot spring, and indeed the Rabbanon aser that. So you see that it can't be that everybody agrees that it's mutter by karka. So the Gemara changes its tune and says, no, what Rav Chisda meant is Ela itmar, hachi itmar. Machloikis bekarka. Aval bekli divrei kol aser. There's a machloikis in karka, like we saw by the Anshe Tveria. Then Rabbi Yehuda says it's also to use hot water that was heated up before Shabbos, whereas Rabbi Shimon says mutter if you want to go ahead and rinse off your entire body. Obviously, when it comes to bathing your entire body, that even Rabbi Meir says is going to be aser. However, when it comes to a kli, everybody says it's going to be aser because of a concern that a person might think that you can go ahead and then heat up cold water into hot water, which is heated up by the fire. Omar Rabbi Barachana Rabbi Yochanan halacha k'Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Barachana says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, this in-between opinion between Rabbi Meir, who's most machmir, and Rabbi Shimon, who's most mekil. Again, Rabbi Yehuda says that when it's huchma before Shabbos, it would be aser to rinse your body on Shabbos. If it was with cold water, then you could rinse your entire body on Shabbos. Amar le Rav Yosef, befeirush shmiyalach or michlala shmiyalach. Rav Yosef wants to then clarify that which Rabbi Chana said to Rabbi Yochanan. Did he hear that explicitly from Rabbi Yochanan, that Allah is like Rabbi Yehuda? Or did he infer it from what he saw or heard from Rabbi Yochanan? My chlala. Ask the Gemara, what does it mean that he might have inferred from Rabbi Yochanan that the opinion is like Rabbi Yehuda? Dom Rav Tanchum Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yonai Amar Rav. Now over here you have to say that it's Amar Rebbe, because Rabbi Yonai was a Talmid of Rebbe and not of Rav. And he said the following: Kol makom sha'ata moitzei shnayim chalukin ve'echad machriya halacha k'divrei machriya. Rabbi Yochanan said in Rabbi Yonai in the name of Rebbe that any place where you find a machlokes between two, and a third one comes the machriya as an in-between opinion, the halacha is like the machriya. And therefore over here, we have two extremes. We have Rabbi Meir on the one side, that is machmir, with huchmu, not only with water that's huchmu lifnei Shabbos, but even with mayim tzoinenim, that cannot be used to rinse off one's entire goof on Shabbos. And you have on the other extreme, Rabbi Shimon, who is matir both cases, both in hot water and of course of cold water. So the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, the machriya, that says when it comes to water that's huchmu lifnei Shabbos, that cannot be used to rinse off in one's entire body. But when it comes to cold water, he can do so. Now the Gemara says there's an exception to this rule, and this exception we had a glimpse of on Daf Chavtes Amud Aleph. The Gemara had brought this in regards to our Mishnah there in the second parak that discusses the Neros of Shabbos, it said over there, if you have a beged kipla that you made into wicks, so there's a machloikis if it loses its shem beged as a kli or not. According to Rabbi Eliezer, even after you made it into a psila, then it still retains its shem as a kli and it's mekabel tuma. According to Rabbi Akiva, he loses the shem kli after making it into a beged, and therefore it's tahor. The Gemara brought then and said that this is talking about the following machlokis between Rabbi Eliezer and ultimately Rabbi Akiva, and said that that's the case over here, mikule metlonios. And it says that Rabbi Eliezer there is talking about when it's less than sholosh al sholosh tfachim. If you use, let's say, these rags to stop up a pipe or to clean a mill, does it lose the status of the kli of the beged that it was before? According to Rabbi Eliezer, it does not lose its status as a beged, and therefore it's mekabel tuma. According to Rabbi Yoshua, he says that it does lose its status as a beged, and it's not mekabel tuma. And Rabbi Akiva is the middle opinion. Afterwards, the Gemara says that you can't go like Rabbi Akiva the Machriya, because it says over here, Shafa Pisha Rabbi Eliezer Machriya Rabbi Yoshua Mekil Rabbi Akiva Machriya Ein halach gedivei Machriya. The halach is not like the Machriya. Chada Rabbi Akiva Talmidhu. One reason is because Rabbi Akiva is a Talmud of Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yoshua, and therefore you cannot use his opinion to be Machriya over one of them. V'oid, and further, Hodar Bei Rabbi Akiva Lagabi Rabbi Yoshua, like we saw in the Chav Testament Beis, that at the end Rabbi Akiva was Chayzer boy, and indeed he went like the opinion of Rabbi Yoshua, not as a middle opinion, but rather like Rabbi Yoshua, the Mekel opinion, and said that it loses Shem Beged and becomes no longer a Kli, and it's no longer susceptible to Tumah. V'i Mechlala Mai. Now the Gemara goes back to our question. So if indeed he heard that it was inferred from Rabbi Yochanan that the opinion that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda in this brisa, Dilma Hani Mili b'masnisin, aber b'brisa loy. The reason why he asked if it was referred as opposed to if it was heard b'feirush is because if it was inferred, he says maybe that klal of being the halacha is like the machriya, that's only when you have within a Mishnah itself. But over here, we had said before that our Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon, because we said we're talking about that it's rinsing off entire goof when it was water that was huchmu b'lifnei Shabbos. That was indeed Rabbi Shimon. That's who we said is the author of our Mishnah, the Stam Mishnah. So therefore, you can't use the Brisa to be machriya against what we proved to be our Stam Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon. Amalei, so he's back to him. Ana befeirush shmieli. I heard Rabbi Yochanan say this befeirush that the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, and therefore the halacha is Rabbi Yehuda. He says not like Rabbi Shimon, and indeed, according to this opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, that a person cannot wash off his entire goof with water that was heated up before Shabbos, only with water that was cold water.